Welcome, scientists, to Kepler 452b. You are here because planetary exploration has discovered an alien laboratory filled with 4 previously unknown elements. Now, I know you're excited to begin experimenting with these elements, but before you do, we ask that you familiarize yourself with the following lab protocols. To set up a game of synthesis, begin by writing each player's name on a different section of the active element disk and give them a player board. All players must use the same side of the player board. If there are more than 4 players, write 2 names in each section as needed. Next, shuffle the molecular chain and molecular pattern decks and deal 1 card from each, placing the rest in the box. These cards will provide endgame scoring opportunities. Finally, each player should take the marker corresponding to the color where their name is written, and the bond and mutation dice should be placed in easy reach of all players. A game of synthesis is played in 28 rounds, with each round consisting of 2 phases. In phase 1, preparation, you will rotate the active element disk 90 degrees, and each player will gain the marker that is now next to their player name. Of course, you can skip this step in the first round. And each player then marks off the round on their player board. In phase 2, synthesis, the yellow player will roll the bond and mutation dice. The bond die will provide a shape that each player will be adding to their board, while the mutation die will modify how that shape can be drawn. There are 3 mandatory mutations, 1 for adding a line to the bond, 1 for subtracting a line from the bond, and the 3rd for putting the bond on twice. There are also 3 optional mutations for removing any number of lines from the bond down to a minimum of 1, adding a bond, ignoring the connection rules, and finally, you can move 1 line of the bond to another position. Bonds must be drawn in full, but can be mirrored or rotated. They must connect to your previously added lines or the starting molecule, and cannot be drawn over top of previously existing lines, thick black lines, or extend beyond the boundaries of the board. If the bond you added results in a closed hexagon, you have created a molecule. The color of the last added bond determines the type and composition of that molecule. Count the number of bonds on the hex matching the color of the final bond, and write that number inside the molecule. In the top right corner is the molecule composition table. Find that number in the table and color in the lowest cell in the corresponding number column. Adjacent cells of the same color in this table can be joined in a sequence to provide endgame scoring. But let's talk about that a little bit later. When you complete a row or column in this table, you get a free bond which you can use at any time and in any color. Also, each completed row and column is worth 5 points at the end of the game. You'll notice that on the player board, some hexagons have a bond or mutation symbol within them. If you close a hexagon around one of these symbols, in addition to creating a molecule, you can also claim that bond or mutation for immediate use. In the case of a bond, you would draw it somewhere on your board in the same color that created the molecule. If you choose not to add a new bond at this time, you cannot go back and do it later. Now, other hexagons on the board will have a basic shape, a triangle, a square, a circle, or a hexagon. If you are able to close one of these hexagons using the same color, you do not calculate composition, but instead shade that shape in and color in the square and under the corresponding shape in the scoring formula at the bottom of your player board. These shapes come in pairs. The first one you do is worth 6 points, and the second an additional 10. Plus, you would get a free bond, which, again, you can use anywhere, at any time, in any color. Finally, at the end of the 28th round, it's time for endgame scoring. At this point, you may want to use any unused free bonds. Begin by drawing sequences in the molecular composition table. Longer sequences are worth more points, but they cannot branch. Sequences are drawn orthogonally only, to a maximum of 7 connections. For each sequence, count the number of connections and determine their points using the aid to the left of the table. Add those points together and enter that in the scoring formula at the bottom of your player board. Next, count the number of completed rows and columns in that table, multiply that number by 5, and enter that in the next square in the scoring formula. Finally, determine your score for the molecular chains and molecular patterns cards and enter those numbers in the corresponding boxes, again in the scoring formula. Finally, add up all the boxes in the scoring formula and determine who has won this game of synthesis, the molecular journey. This matters. I shall look over my notes. She has walked away but left the camera rolling. How silly of her. I'm available for children's parties. I am not. I lied. We're here because planetary... You are here because planetary... Why can't I say that word? Hi. You are here because planetary...
Planetary?
I know. My mind doesn't... Okay. Sequences are drawn orthogonally...
It's the one.